I've spent 23 years as a cold case detective, and I can tell you this. Some cases don't just go cold. They freeze solid, entombing secrets that everyone assumes will never see daylight again. But 2025 changed everything. What I'm about to share with you isn't just about solving murders. It's about the moment when cutting-edge technology collides with human obsession, when artificial intelligence meets a mother's grief, when DNA whispers secrets from decades past. 4 cases, 4 families who'd given up hope, 4 killers who thought they'd gotten away with it, and 4 breakthroughs so stunning they've rewritten everything we thought we knew about justice. The first case I'm going to tell you about involves a woman who was murdered in her own home 32 years ago. A crime scene that yielded nothing useful for 3 decades, and a piece of technology that can essentially travel back in time. If that doesn't make your skin crawl with anticipation, nothing will. Before I continue, I need you to do something. If you've ever wondered whether the truth eventually surfaces, whether evil truly pays its debt, then you owe it to every victim still waiting for justice to subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video. Because the families I'm about to tell you about, they needed people to care enough to keep looking. Don't scroll past their stories. July 15th, 1993, Phoenix, Arizona. I wasn't the original detective on the Rebecca Holloway case, but I inherited it in 2003 along with 47 other unsolved murders. Rebecca was 34 when someone entered her glass-walled contemporary home in the dead of night and stabbed her 17 times. Her husband, Marcus, was at a medical conference in San Diego. Their 2 children, aged 6 and 8, were sleeping over at their grandmother's house. Rebecca died alone. The crime scene was, by all accounts, a forensic nightmare. Monsoon rains had shattered one of the glass walls earlier that evening, and the house was soaked. Any DNA evidence was compromised. No fingerprints survived. The murder weapon was never found. Marcus Holloway was initially the prime suspect. It's always the husband. But his alibi was airtight. Hotel records, dinner receipts, eyewitnesses at the conference. He even presented on thoracic surgery at 9 a.m. the morning after his wife was killed, seemingly composed and professional. The case went cold within 6 months. For years, I reviewed the files periodically. I spoke to the Holloway children, now grown. Daniel, the eldest, became a lawyer. Sarah, the younger one, struggled with addiction for years before finding recovery. Both of them carried the weight of their mother's unsolved murder like a stone around their necks. Every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone, shadowed by the question, who killed her? Marcus remarried in 1997. Wife number 2, Teresa, was 23 years old, a pharmaceutical sales rep who'd allegedly met Marcus at a hospital. They seemed happy enough, had 2 more kids. From the outside, Marcus had rebuilt his life from tragedy. But I never stopped thinking about that glass house. In January 2025, our department received a grant to implement environmental DNA analysis software. Technology so advanced, it could extract and identify DNA from air samples. Not fresh air samples, historical air samples, reconstructed using atmospheric modeling, and trace particulates collected from preserved crime scene materials. It sounds like science fiction, but it's real, and it's terrifying. We selected 5 cases for the pilot program. Rebecca Holloway's was one of them. We still had sealed evidence bags containing fragments of the shattered glass wall, pieces of carpet, even a sealed container of dust that had been vacuumed from the crime scene in 1993. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the lead scientist on the project, explained it to me like this. Every person sheds approximately 30 to 40,000 skin cells per hour. Those cells contain DNA. And when we combine the preserved particulate matter from your crime scene with atmospheric modeling data from that specific night in 1993, we can essentially reconstruct who was in that house. 3 weeks later, she called me into the lab. "We found him," she said quietly. "But you're not going to like it. The DNA belonged to Marcus Holloway. Not just trace amounts that could be explained by him living there. Massive concentrations suggesting he'd been in the house during the time window of Rebecca's murder, which was impossible because he was in San Diego. Except he wasn't. When we confronted Marcus with the evidence, something broke in him. After 32 years, he confessed. He'd paid a colleague to present his research at the conference. He'd driven through the night, entered his own home, murdered his wife while she slept, and drove back to San Diego, arriving in time for breakfast the next morning. The shattered glass wall wasn't from the monsoon. It was from Rebecca trying to escape, throwing a chair through it before he caught her. Why? He'd been having an affair with Teresa even then. Rebecca had discovered it and threatened to divorce him, take the house, the kids, everything. His medical practice was just taking off. He couldn't afford to lose it all. "I thought I'd been so careful," Marcus said in the interrogation room, his voice hollow. "I thought if there was no evidence, there was no crime. But you can't escape your own skin, can you? Literally." Daniel and Sarah were in the observation room when he confessed. I watched Sarah collapse into her brother's arms, sobbing, not with sadness, but with something that looked like relief. The question that had haunted them for 3 decades finally had an answer. Marcus Holloway was charged with first-degree murder. At 71 years old, he'll spend whatever remains of his life in prison. His second family, Teresa and their children, have disowned him. His medical license was revoked. His legacy is ash. But Rebecca's children finally got to stop wondering. Justice after 32 years isn't sweet. It's bittersweet, tinged with anger at all the wasted time. But it's still justice. Some cases haunt you differently than others. The Rebecca Holloway case was about uncovering a carefully constructed lie. But the case of Timothy Chen was about a community's collective failure, a missing child, and a mother who never stopped searching, even when everyone else had moved on. October 12th, 1998. Fairfield County, Connecticut. Timothy Chen was 9 years old when he disappeared while riding his bike home from a friend's house. It was a Tuesday afternoon, still bright outside. The route was less than a mile through a quiet suburban neighborhood where people knew each other's names. Timothy should have been home in 10 minutes. He vanished instead. The initial investigation was massive. Hundreds of volunteers combed the woods. Police interviewed every registered sex offender within a 50-mile radius. The FBI brought in their Crimes Against Children unit. For 6 weeks, Timothy's face was on every news channel, every grocery store bulletin board, every milk carton. Then the leads dried up. No witnesses, no evidence, no body. Timothy Chen became another name on a list of missing children, a tragedy with no resolution. His mother, Linda Chen, became one of those parents you read about, the ones who never give up. She founded a nonprofit, organized annual searches, kept Timothy's case alive through sheer force of will. I met her in 2007 when I took over the case. She was in her 50s by then, her face lined with grief, but her eyes still burning with determination. "He's out there," she told me. "I know everyone thinks I'm in denial, that I should accept he's gone. But I'm his mother. I would know if he was dead. Do you understand?" I didn't, not really, but I respected her enough to keep trying. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: genealogical DNA databases. You've probably heard about this technology. It's how they caught the Golden State Killer. People submit their DNA to ancestry websites looking for relatives, never realizing they might be creating a genetic map that leads directly to a killer. In February 2025, we submitted DNA from a cigarette butt found near where Timothy's bike was discovered, a piece of evidence that had yielded no matches in any criminal database for 27 years. But this time, we ran it through a genealogical database instead. We got a hit. Not a direct match, but a familial connection. The DNA belonged to someone related to a man named Robert Pierce, a construction worker who lived in Fairfield County in 1998, but moved to Oregon shortly after Timothy's disappearance. Robert Pierce had never been on our radar. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no connection to the Chen family. But he'd been working on a housing development about 2 blocks from where Timothy was last seen. When we located Robert in Portland, he was 63 years old, living alone, working as a handyman. We brought him in for questioning, expecting denials, lawyer requests, the usual dance. Instead, he wept. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "For 27 years. I've been waiting for someone to figure it out." What Robert Pierce told us over the next 6 hours was one of the most disturbing confessions I've ever heard. Not because it was violent or sadistic, but because of how utterly, devastatingly human it was. He'd been driving home from work that October afternoon when he saw Timothy on his bike. The boy swerved suddenly to avoid a squirrel, rode directly into the path of Robert's truck. Robert hit him. Not hard, just a glancing blow, but enough to knock Timothy off the bike into the ditch beside the road. Robert stopped immediately. He ran to Timothy, who was conscious but dazed, bleeding from a head wound. And in that moment, Robert Pierce, who'd already been in trouble at work, who'd been drinking that afternoon, who was terrified of what hitting a child would do to his life, made a choice. He put Timothy in his truck. He told himself he was taking the boy to the hospital. But somewhere during that drive, panic overtook reason. Instead of a hospital, Robert drove to a remote section of woods he knew from hunting. Timothy was unconscious by then, possibly already dying from the head injury. Robert buried him there. "I didn't mean to kill him," Robert said, his face in his hands. "Every single day since then, I've seen his face. I moved across the country to escape it. But you can't escape yourself." I thought about turning myself in 1,000 times, but I was a coward. I'm still a coward. Have you ever wondered what you would do in a moment of pure panic, when one decision splits your entire life into before and after? How do we measure the weight of a terrible mistake against decades of guilt? I want you to think about that and leave me a comment below with your honest answer, because understanding the human capacity for both evil and remorse is what keeps me doing this work. The coordinates Robert provided led us to a section of forest that had been searched in 1998 but yielded nothing. Technology has evolved since then. Ground-penetrating radar found the grave in less than an hour. We recovered Timothy Chen's remains on a cold morning in March 2025. He was still wearing his backpack, which had somehow survived burial, protecting fragments of a school assignment inside. His favorite toy, a small plastic dinosaur, was in his pocket. Linda Chen was 68 years old when I told her we'd found her son. She didn't react the way you might expect. She didn't cry or scream or collapse. She simply closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said, "Can I bring him home now?" We held a funeral for Timothy 3 weeks later. Hundreds of people attended, some who'd searched for him in 1998, some who'd only heard his story but felt connected to it. Linda spoke about finally being able to sleep through the night without wondering where her baby was. She spoke about forgiveness, though she admitted she hadn't reached it yet. Robert Pierce pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and improper disposal of human remains. Because Timothy's death was initially accidental and because Robert's cooperation led to recovery of the remains, he received 15 years, a sentence that enraged some and satisfied others. For me, the case wasn't about punishment. It was about a mother who searched for 27 years, finally getting to bury her son. And that's not justice in the traditional sense, but it's closure, which sometimes is the only justice available. By the time I started investigating the murders of Jasmine Williams, Keisha Patterson, and Mara Rodriguez, I'd been a detective for 19 years. I thought I'd seen every variation of human cruelty. I was wrong. 1997, 2001, and 2004, Baltimore, Maryland. 3 women, all African American, all in their early 20s, all sex workers, all strangled, their bodies dumped in similar locations. Vacant lots in economically depressed neighborhoods. The kind of murders that, I'm ashamed to say, don't always get the resources they deserve. The kind of victims who are sometimes treated as less important, less worthy of justice. The 3 cases were technically linked in our database, flagged as potentially related by a detective who'd noticed the similarities. But without physical evidence connecting them, and with years between the murders, the connection remained theoretical. I inherited all 3 cases. In 2009, I was the first Black woman detective in our cold case unit, and I specifically requested these files because Jasmine, Keisha, and Mara deserved someone who would see them as more than statistics, more than the worst day of their lives. I spent years on these cases. I interviewed family members, tracked down people who'd known the women, mapped their last known locations. I hit walls everywhere. No witnesses willing to talk, no DNA evidence. The killer had been careful. No security cameras in those neighborhoods back then. In 2014, a man named David Strotter was arrested for the murder of another sex worker. His DNA was collected and run through the system. It matched DNA from underneath Mara Rodriguez's fingernails, a sample so degraded that the 2004 technology couldn't generate a profile, but which 2014 technology could partially reconstruct. We thought we'd found our killer, but Strotter had alibis for Jasmine's and Keisha's murders. He was incarcerated during Jasmine's murder and deployed overseas in the military during Keisha's. He confessed to killing Mara but insisted he'd acted alone, never killed anyone else. So we had a partial answer. Justice for Mara, but none for Jasmine and Keisha. That's where things stood until January 2025, when a new AI-powered investigative system called Holmes 9 was implemented in our department. Holmes' Home Office Large Major Inquiry System had been used in the UK for decades, but this 9th iteration incorporated predictive AI and pattern recognition that bordered on precognitive. I was skeptical. I've seen plenty of technology promise to revolutionize detective work that ended up being expensive garbage, but I uploaded the case files for Jasmine and Keisha anyway, along with hundreds of pages of investigative notes, witness statements, and contextual data about Baltimore in the late 90s and early 2000s. Holmes 9 processed the information for 72 hours. Then it generated a report that made my blood run cold. The system had identified a pattern I'd missed, not in the murders themselves, but in the investigations, specifically in how evidence had been logged and processed. In both Jasmine's and Keisha's cases, certain pieces of potential evidence had been collected but never properly tested or had mysteriously gone missing from the evidence room. Physical items that should have been sent to the lab but were marked as not probative. Witness statements that were taken but never followed up on. And every single one of these investigative failures had occurred when one specific person had access to the evidence. Detective Lawrence Maddox, a senior detective who'd worked in the homicide unit from 1995 to 2009, then retired. Lawrence Maddox was a legend in the department. Highest solve rate in Baltimore PD history. Decorated officer, mentor to dozens of younger detectives, including me during my first year. Holmes 9 suggested that Detective Maddox hadn't just failed to investigate properly. It suggested he had actively sabotaged the investigations, and it cross-referenced his work schedule, personal vehicle registrations, and even his known locations based on cell tower data from the early 2000s. Placing him near where both Jasmine and Keisha were last seen. I didn't want to believe it. This was a man I respected, someone I'd looked up to. But I've learned that you can't let personal feelings override evidence. We obtained a warrant for Maddox's DNA. He was 72 years old, living in a retirement community in Florida. When local police arrived to execute the warrant, Maddox seemed almost relieved. "I wondered if anyone would ever figure it out," he told the officers. "I thought I was too smart. Turns out I was just lucky for a long time." His DNA matched samples from both Jasmine Williams and Keisha Patterson. Samples that had been collected but that Maddox himself had marked as too degraded for testing, and that had subsequently been stored improperly, ensuring they would degrade further. During his confession, Maddox explained his method with chilling precision. He would identify vulnerable women, sex workers, addicts, people who existed on society's margins. He would kill them in ways that mimicked the work of disorganized killers, making the crimes look like the work of clients or random violence. Then he would volunteer for the investigations, subtly steering them away from any evidence that might point to him. "I knew exactly how these investigations worked," he said. "I wrote the protocols. I knew where the weaknesses were, which shortcuts tired detectives would take. I could make evidence disappear just by questioning whether it was worth testing. Who's going to second-guess a senior detective with a 90% solve rate?" He'd killed 5 women total over 12 years. Mara Rodriguez had been killed by David Strotter, a copycat of sorts, though Strotter hadn't known he was copying anyone. Maddox had actually been frustrated by that, he admitted. It disrupted his pattern, made him stop before he'd planned to. "I stopped because I was afraid Strotter's arrest would generate new scrutiny on the other cases," Maddox said. "I retired early and moved to Florida. I thought I was safe." The hardest part of that investigation was contacting the families. Jasmine Williams' mother had died in 2016, never knowing her daughter's killer had been the very detective who'd promised to find him. Keisha Patterson's sister wept when I told her. Not just because we'd found the killer, but because of who he was. "How are we supposed to trust police after this?" she asked me. "You're telling me the man who looked my mother in the eye and promised justice was the one who'd strangled her daughter?" I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. Lawrence Maddox was extradited to Maryland and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. He pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. At his sentencing, he showed no remorse, only frustration that he'd finally been caught. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. If Holmes 9 hadn't identified the pattern in how evidence was mishandled, we never would have looked at Maddox. He would have died peacefully in his retirement community, his reputation intact, while 5 women remain statistics in an unsolved murder database. How many other cases have been sabotaged from within? How many killers have hidden behind badges, using their authority to bury their crimes? The families of Jasmine Williams, Keisha Patterson, and the 3 other women Maddox murdered finally got their answers. They finally got justice, though it came with the bitter knowledge that the system they'd trusted had protected their daughter's killer for decades. I attended all 5 memorial services. I looked each family member in the eye and apologized, not just for the original failures, but for what those failures represented about who we prioritize and who we don't. That's the real breakthrough of 2025. Not just new technology, but the willingness to turn it on ourselves, to examine our own complicity in letting cases go cold. The 4th case I'm going to tell you about is different from the others. It's about a woman named Sofia Castellano, who was murdered in 2009. But it's also about her daughter, Emma, who was 6 years old when she watched her mother die, and who spent 16 years knowing exactly who the killer was, while everyone else treated her as a traumatized child whose memories couldn't be trusted. March 22, 2009, Providence, Rhode Island. Sofia Castellano was a high school music teacher, beloved by her students, divorced from Emma's father, but maintaining a friendly, co-parenting relationship. She was 32 years old when someone broke into her apartment late at night and beat her to death with a blunt object. Her daughter Emma, who was sleeping in the next room, heard the commotion and witnessed part of the attack through a crack in her bedroom door. When police arrived, they found Emma hiding in her closet, nonverbal with shock. It took 3 days before she could speak about what happened. When she finally did, she said the attacker was Uncle Ray, Raymond Castellano, Sofia's ex-husband and Emma's father. There was just one problem. Raymond had an ironclad alibi. He was at a wedding in Boston with approximately 200 witnesses, photos, videos, even his credit card being used at the wedding venue's bar throughout the night. It was physically impossible for him to have been in Providence murdering his ex-wife. Police gently suggested to Emma that she must have been confused, that trauma had mixed up her memories. They theorized she'd seen the attacker in her brain, trying to make sense of horror, had substituted a familiar face, her father, for the stranger's face she'd actually seen. Emma insisted it was her father. She drew pictures of him in the apartment. She described his clothing, his smell, even specific things he'd said. But the evidence said it was impossible, and eventually the investigation moved on from Raymond Castellano. The case went cold. No other suspects emerged. The murder weapon was never found. Raymond maintained his innocence, even seemed genuinely devastated by his ex-wife's death. He fought for custody of Emma But between her accusations and the concern that being in his care would traumatize her further, custody went to Sophia's sister Teresa. Emma grew up in her aunt's house, growing up with the knowledge that everyone thought she was wrong, that her memories were false, that she couldn't trust her own mind. She went through years of therapy. Some therapists suggested she had indeed witnessed the murder, but misidentified the killer due to trauma. Others theorized she'd somehow conflated different memories, dreaming her father was present when he wasn't. But Emma never wavered. She knew what she'd seen. I inherited the Sofia Castellano case in 2016. Emma was 13 by then, a quiet, intense teenager who'd recently started reaching out to me directly, emailing me her memories, her certainty that her father had killed her mother, despite the impossible alibi. "I know what everyone thinks," she wrote to me. "I know the evidence says I'm wrong, but I saw him. I heard his voice. I smelled his cologne. He was there." I wanted to believe her, but the alibi was unbreakable. I investigated other angles, Sophia's colleagues, her students, recent breakups, financial motives. Nothing led anywhere. The case stayed cold. In April 2025, Emma reached out to me again. She was now 22, studying criminal justice in college. She'd been researching, investigating on her own. "I think I know how he did it," she said, when we met at a coffee shop near campus. "I've been researching cases where people faked their presence at events. Deep fakes weren't as sophisticated in 2009, but they existed. What if the person at the wedding wasn't my father?" I'd considered the idea of an impersonator years ago, but the evidence against it seemed overwhelming. The wedding photos clearly showed Raymond. The video footage showed him moving, talking, interacting with people who knew him well. His own brother was the groom. Surely someone would have noticed an imposter. But Emma had found something I'd missed. She'd tracked down the original digital files from the wedding photographer and analyzed them using modern AI detection software designed to identify deep fakes and sophisticated photo manipulation. 6 of the photos showing Raymond had subtle artifacts consistent with digital alteration. Not deep fakes exactly, but something simpler. His face had been digitally added to the body of someone else in the photo, someone of similar height and build. It was sophisticated enough to fool 2009 technology and human eyes. But 2025 AI caught the inconsistencies immediately. Slight mismatches in lighting on the face versus body, resolution differences. Even the fact that Raymond in the photos never made direct eye contact with the camera. We reopened the investigation with this new angle. We re-interviewed wedding guests, asking specifically about their interactions with Raymond that night. What we found was telling. People remembered seeing him, but when pressed for details about actual conversations, most recalled only brief exchanges, usually initiated by them rather than him. Several people remembered thinking he seemed distracted or not quite himself. The wedding had a cash bar. Raymond's credit card being used didn't prove Raymond was using it. We tracked down the bartender from that night, now working at a different venue. She remembered the wedding, but not specifically who'd ordered what. Then we caught a break. The groom, Raymond's brother Michael, had passed away in 2019, but his widow still had boxes of wedding memorabilia, including personal videos shot on phones that had never been uploaded or shared with police. In one shaky 20-second clip shot by a drunk groomsman, we could see the man believed to be Raymond from behind, talking to a bridesmaid. His build was similar to Raymond's, but his gait was slightly different, His shoulders were narrower. We enhanced the video using AI upscaling technology and ran the enhanced footage through gait analysis software. And the way Raymond walked was inconsistent with verified footage of the real Raymond Castellano. Subtle differences, but definitive. The question became, who was the man at the wedding, and where was the real Raymond? Emma had a theory. Her father had a younger cousin, Derek, who looked remarkably like Raymond and who'd always been eager to please him, almost pathologically loyal. Derek had moved to California shortly after the murder and had died in a car accident in 2014. If Derek had impersonated Raymond at the wedding while Raymond was murdering Sophia, Derek could never testify or be interrogated. The perfect accomplice, now dead and silent. We examined Derek's phone records from March 2009. In the weeks leading up to the murder, there were dozens of calls between Derek and Raymond, then nothing after the wedding. We also found that Derek had received a payment of $50,000 from an account traced back to Raymond, paid in installments over the 6 months following Sophia's murder. Raymond had claimed this was a loan to help Derek start a business in California, but Derek had never started any business. The money had gone toward rent, expenses, and living costs, possibly payment for services rendered. The circumstantial evidence was mounting, but we needed something concrete. That's when Emma suggested we look at Derek's car accident. What if it hadn't been an accident? We obtained the accident report from California Highway Patrol. Derek had driven off a cliff on a remote highway in 2014. Investigators had ruled it an accident. Possible drunk driving, though Derek's BAC was only slightly above legal limit. But no one had investigated the possibility of foul play because there was no reason to suspect it. Until now. Raymond's credit card records showed he'd been in California the week of Derek's death, supposedly for a work conference. But we couldn't place him at any conference events during the exact time of the accident. We couldn't prove Raymond had killed Derek to silence him, but we could prove the impersonation at the wedding. And if Derek had impersonated Raymond, that meant Raymond's alibi was manufactured, which meant Emma had been right all along. When we brought Raymond in for questioning with this new evidence, he lawyered up immediately. But Emma attended the interrogation, sitting in the observation room, watching her father through the one-way glass. I'd arranged for her to be there against protocol because I believed she'd earned it. 16 years of being told her memories were false. Her trauma had confused her. She couldn't trust her own mind. She deserved to watch the truth come out. Raymond's lawyer tried to prevent prosecution, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial. But the combination of the wedding photo manipulation, Derek's payment, Raymond's presence in California when Derek died, and the gait analysis was enough for the DA to move forward. During the trial, the prosecution presented a theory. Raymond had been furious about his divorce, about custody arrangements, about Sophia moving on with her life. He'd planned her murder meticulously, convincing his cousin Derek to impersonate him at the wedding, while he drove to Providence, killed Sophia, and drove back to Boston, arriving at his home well after the wedding had ended, but within a time frame he could explain away. He'd paid Derek for the deception, then grown paranoid about Derek revealing the truth. The California accident had been Raymond tying up loose ends. Emma testified. At 22 years old, she stood in front of the jury and recounted the night her mother died with crystalline clarity. She described seeing her father through the crack in her door. She described his voice, his movements, the specific way he'd held the baseball bat he'd used to kill her mother. Everyone told me I was wrong, she said. Doctors, therapists, well-meaning adults. They said trauma had confused me, that I was a child who couldn't be trusted. But I knew. I always knew. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Raymond Castellano was sentenced to life without parole. He never confessed, never showed remorse. But it didn't matter. Emma finally had her vindication. After the sentencing, Emma and I sat on the courthouse steps. She was crying, but not from sadness. "Thank you for believing me," she said, "not just now, but over the years. You never completely dismissed me, even when the evidence said you should." I told her the truth. You never stopped fighting for your mother. That kind of love, that persistence, it doesn't lie. I should have trusted your certainty sooner. Emma's case taught me something crucial. Victims and witnesses, especially children, are often dismissed when their accounts don't match the physical evidence. But sometimes the evidence is wrong. Sometimes it's been manipulated, and sometimes the truth is exactly what a traumatized 6-year-old said it was, even when every adult in the room doubts her. The breakthrough in 2025 wasn't just technology, it was listening to Emma, taking her seriously even after 16 years of everyone else telling her she was mistaken. That's justice. Not just punishing the guilty, but vindicating the victims who never stopped knowing the truth. It's late now. I'm sitting in my office, the same office where I've spent 2 decades, reviewing cold cases, looking at crime scene photos until they blur together, calling families on anniversaries of murders to tell them I haven't forgotten. 4 cases resolved in 2025. 4 families who finally have answers. Rebecca Holloway's children can visit their father in prison and ask him why. They'll never understand, but they can ask. Timothy Chen's mother buried her son and can finally visit a grave instead of searching woods and holding on to desperate hope. The families of Jasmine Williams, Keisha Patterson, and 3 other women know their daughter's murders weren't random violence, but the calculated cruelty of a man who used his badge to hunt. It's a terrible truth, but it's truth. And Emma Castellano, future detective, future advocate for child witnesses, proved that a 6-year-old girl can see clearly while all the adults are blind. These breakthroughs weren't just about technology, though technology played a crucial role. They were about persistence, about refusing to accept that some questions have no answers, about believing that justice delayed is still justice worth fighting for. I started this video by asking if evil truly pays its debt. Now I want to know what you think. After hearing these 4 stories, do you believe justice has an expiration date? Should there be a statute of limitations on murder? Or does the debt remain no matter how many years pass? Leave me your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories affected you, if you believe every victim deserves someone who won't stop looking for answers, then subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Because somewhere, right now, there's a cold case sitting in a filing cabinet. There's a family still waiting. And maybe, just maybe, the breakthrough they need is coming in 2026 or 2027 or however long it takes. Because I've learned this. The truth is patient. It can wait decades. Buried under lies and bad evidence and failed investigations, but it's always there, waiting for someone stubborn enough, obsessed enough, or technological enough to dig it up. I'm Detective Sarah Martinez, and I'll never stop digging. The dead can wait. but they never forget, and neither do I.